Thank you. Yeah. 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 I told him to set me up here. Yeah. Als heb ik getracht, then. The Chesaron is the Olam, you know. But whatever. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Boiker Tov. Okay. So we began, welcome everybody, good morning. Bruchim Abayim. So we began yesterday the Maimer Yavi'yu Levush Malchus, the first Maimer of Purim and Torah by the Balatanya, page 179, or Tzaddik. We're holding column 2, closer to the bottom of the page. And the main point that the Balatanya brought out here was understanding of the physical reality of the physical world from a unique perspective, and actually quite counterintuitive. Thank you so much. There's a concept called Seder Hishtalshalos. Seder Hishtalshalos means there's a system, like a shalshelis, a chain, there's a system of something evolving or devolving, developing from one space, from one level, as it descends to another one. It's called Ilah v'Alul. Ilah means there's a cause, an antecedent, and the Alul is the child of that cause, the offspring, the consequence of it. And there's always a relationship between the Ilah and the Alul. This type of Alul comes from this type of Ilah. An orange tree could come from the seed of an orange. An apple tree could come from the seed of an apple, because the properties of that tree mirror and reflect the properties of the seed of the apple tree. If you take the seed of a kiwi or the seed of a watermelon, it's amazing, but it can't produce an orange. Just like the seed, the sperm and the egg of a person can give birth to a person, to a human being, because of its particular, what we call today, DNA structure. And it's maybe a very slight difference. I mean, humanity shares DNA, 99.9% of our DNA is identical. But that tiny, 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 tiny fraction, that makes the whole difference between you and me. It's quite amazing. The imprint of Hashem on every person is a tiny, tiny fraction. What makes you, you, and me, me. We take our individuality very serious, but we have to remember 99.9, it's identical. And then there's that little tiny difference. If you look at human beings and baboons, or human beings and chimpanzees, right, we share, I think, 98.8% of DNA. So the difference between me and the chimpanzee, with all due respect, is from a genetic point of view, it seems so tiny. But it's in that little tininess where there's so much difference. So all Ilah v'Alul, the Alul has to reflect and be a mirror of the Ilah, and that's called Hishtalshalos. So he says the divine energy goes through a Seder Hishtalshalos. The beginning of that Hishtalshalos is called Chachma. That's the beginning. That's the first glimmer The first glimmer of consciousness, like in a person, Chachma is the first glimmer of a conscious idea, which later needs to be developed. As we discussed, you have an epiphany, you have a blitz, a lightening, and then it needs to develop. So you have from Chachma, you have Bina, you have Das, and then you have the Midos, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod. This is an evolutionary process within the spiritual worlds of a person. And then you have Machshava, Dibur, Maisa. That's all Hishtalshalus. And it starts with Chachma. Whenever there's Hishtalshalus, the first level and the second level are connected to each other because they are evolving from each other. The second brings out the potential of the first. Right? A child comes from the father and mother. It brings out the potential. It's a new entity, but it's a new entity that emerges from the previous entity. The tree brings out what's in the seed. It's not new. Yeah. Yafa koyach haben, mi koyach ha'av, like the Gemara says. Even the Yafa is mi koyach ha'av. The Gemara says in Shvuas that Yafa koyach haben, in halacha, the child of the power of the child could sometimes be greater than the power of the one who gave him the power. So there's a Taichin Chassidus, Yafa koyach haben is also mi koyach ha'av. That's also. The child can bring out things that in the father they remain dormant. We see it constantly. There's talents, there's skills, there's blessings in a father, or grandfather, great-grandfather. It's all there, but it never came out. It's dormant. And by the way, it's also in the opposite. There's things that parents deal with, and the children are the one who have to deal with it. There was a Yid who told me once that he was struggling a lot with his own image and confidence and these types of things. So he told me once that in the 50s or 60s he was on the Yechidus by the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So he was sharing some of his struggles. So he didn't tell me exactly what it was. He said the Rebbe turned to him and said, "This is from your father. Don't confuse it with you. Das ist von dein Taten." It's very interesting. Like, he was trying to help him. In other words, das ist von dein Taten. Sag nicht damit dir. Yeah. So he told us to me himself. He was a bacher. He was a very young bacher. Today he's an older Jew. And he said, das ist von dein Taten. Don't mix it. You don't have to take it on yourself. But that distinction is not such a simple distinction because your father lives inside of you. And it's both in a beautiful way. The beautiful way, the Alul inherits the Ilah. The Alul continues the Ilah. The Alul brings out the Ilah. And it brings it to the next level. It brings it to the next stage. In our life, the model is generally Ilah v'Alul. A cause has a consequence. An action has a reaction. And the reaction becomes a cause for another reaction. And the last Alul you can trace back to the first Ilah, even if it takes thousands of years. Obviously, you have to know all the facts and you have to know all the variables. It's not so simple, but you can trace it back. We each and every single one of us has a piece of Adam and Chava. 5,783 years passed. That's true. But some things, the passage of years don't eclipse the essential building blocks of how Ilah and Alul works. The essential rules of how birth works, how the link of generations continues, that remains thousands of years. There's a piece of Adam in you and there's a piece of Chava in you. So there's a piece of Avram in you and a piece of Sarah in you. Even though we didn't know all these people, but we don't have to know them. We know them because we know ourselves. Right? Sometimes the best, the deepest way of knowing people is because you know yourself. You know everything there is to know. Okay. That's true. So the rule of Ilah v'Alul applies from the beginning of Chachma, from the beginning of Ishtalshalus. It's like a Shalshalis. But Ilah v'Alul has a limitation. The limitation is the Alul is a mirror of the Ilah. The Ilah is not going to create something that's completely disconnected from the Ilah. The Ilah is going to bring out what is inside of it so that the second thing is a continuum of the first. And it knows the connection, and it wants naturally a connection. It wants to have a connection. The reason it wants to have a connection is because that's what it is. It's connected to its source. So Ila v'Alul can go further, but the furthest it goes, it's always a reflection of the previous Ila. Comes the Alter Rebbe and says, and that's why all Ila v'Alul works for the spiritual worlds. And even the physical world, for the spirituality in the physical world. So we say, the nefesh habahamis of an animal is rooted in Pnei Shor, the face of the ox of the Merkava. All birds, the soul of birds, the consciousness of birds is rooted in the Merkava of Yecheskel, in the face of the eagle. Right? And the consciousness, this Pnei Shor, Pnei Aryeh, the consciousness of Chayas, of beasts, undomesticated, is rooted in the Malachim, the angels of the Merkava. Now you can't compare the consciousness of a lion or of a tiger, right? Or of a bird or of a mammal to the Merkava of Yecheskel. But you could. Because it's Hishtalshalus, it's Ila v'Alul, there's a spiritual consciousness in the animal. And by the way, it's one of the reasons the Alter Rebbe says why before Krishma we speak a lot about the Malachim, the whole section over there. It's Baruch Lanetzach, how the Malachim is Kulam Oimdim B'Ramayla Mashmiim B'Yira, Kulam Ahuvim, Kulam Brudim, it's all about the Malachim. Right? Makdishim Amlichim Hashem Akel, Makab Malem Malchus Shemayim Zemizeh, and they say Kaddish Kaddish, and that's the Srafim, and then there's Efanim and Chayis HaKadosh. Why are we not talking about? So the Alter Rebbe says, it's a hafladik word, because the Nefesh HaBahamis comes from them. Chayis HaKadosh means holy chayis, holy animals. Not so nice to call angels holy animals, yeah? You remember when they called kids in yeshiva chayis, yeah? P'stachaya. Chayiro, yeah. You say Chayis HaKadosh, what noch gewen, yeah. That was to negate. You shouldn't think you're from the Chayis HaKadosh. Yeah. But the truth is, it's a very powerful idea, because the Chaya down here is a Hishtalshalus from the Chayis HaKadosh. So when we're talking to the Nefesh HaBahamis before Krishma, you're trying to explain to the Nefesh HaBahamis who it really is. Your Zayda is Chayis HaKadosh. Your Zayda is the Srafim. You think you're just a grubba animal. You're not so pashut. All your passion that you have, it's really Chayis HaKadosh. It's lost in translation. That's why it's such a critical part of davening, because it's bringing the Nefesh HaBahamis into the relationship. All your passion, everything you're busy with, really it's Chayis HaKadosh. It came down by Hishtalshalus. That's when you're talking about the ruchnius of the Nefesh HaBahamis, the spiritual energy of it. But he says when it comes to the Gashmi, the bridge from the leap from the spiritual to the physical is an absolute leap. There's an infinity in that leap. It's not Ila v'Alul anymore. Because what happens in the Gashmi? In the Gashmi there's a new reality, and that is a sense of detachment. A sense of complete severance, of complete independence. So all the energy and consciousness in the world can't create matter. It can create one consciousness, another consciousness, another consciousness, another consciousness, another consciousness. But to go to the world of matter, of geshem, of physical, that's a completely new reality. And when you ask the physical, who are you? Where do you come from? He says, I don't come from anywhere. I am because I am. That's it. I'm a self-contained identity. The physical on its own doesn't point to anything. It doesn't say, by the way, I'm an ulul from an ilah. An emotion points to a progenitor. Right? If you ask a person, where did the emotion come from? It's a good question. Where did the idea come from? What are the consequences of this idea? That's all the language of Ila v'Alul. You talk to the physical, a rock, and you say, where'd you come from? He says, who said I have to come from somewhere? Huh? It came, right? But it's not Ila v'Alul. And that's why in the Geshem you don't see its source. In Ila v'Alul, there's always a connection between the Ila and the Alul. This is called Yesh Me'ayin. Yesh me'ayin means it looks like it came from nothingness, and therefore it says it didn't come from anywhere. Because if I came from nothingness, you can't come from nothingness. I didn't come from anywhere. So Alter Rebbe says, Dafke, the physical, comes from Sovev Kalalman, from Hashem beyond Ishtalshalos. Comes from Hashem, who's a Kel Yachal, who's not defined by any stages of evolution, and therefore can create something that's completely remote from the Ilah, something completely new. So the physical reality of the body and of the world is rooted in a much deeper place in Elokus than the spiritual. And this was from the Giluyim of the last Purim, the Alter Rebbe. This is the last Maimah of Purim, Tov Kuf Ayin Beis. There's a letter that he wrote a few days before his passing, Egeres HaKodesh Siman Chaf. And over there also he brought out the Maila of Gashmis, that it comes from Atzmos. And here also the last Purim, this his Galos, that precisely that world, that reality, which seems the most distant, in a way, it's much deeper than all the Ruchnius in the world. Because all the Ruchnius is Ilah V'Olol. And Ilah V'Olol is only Mamalek Alman. Mamalek Alman means the way a Lakus comes in to a structure, and then it goes from level to level to level, starting from Chachma. But in order to bridge and create the quantum leap between Ruchni and Gashmi, as much as something will be brought down spiritually, it's not going to turn into something physical. The transformation of energy into matter, of spiritual into physical, this comes from a place of absolute infinity, where there's no structure whatsoever. So it's not anymore a gradual transition, it's a new Hisgalus, it's a new reality. And when you look at the Gashmi, it has no connection. So by being disconnected, it reveals that it's connected to something much deeper. It's not connected to the source in a way that it mirrors it, it reflects it like Ilah V'Olol. It's a leap from what he calls Sovev Kalalman. Sovev Kalalman is that Hashem is a Kel Yachal, and therefore spirituality and physicality are identical by him, and just like he can create spiritual, he can create Gashmias. And the Gashmias is not an Olol from the Ilah. So whenever we say that everything in this world is a mirror of the spiritual world, that's the spirituality in the world. But the Geshem, the bruteness, the physical itself, there's a secret in the physical itself. In the Gashmi, the fact that it became Gashmi. And that's rooted in a deeper place that comes from Sovev Kalam, which is completely not limited. Because it's not limited, so therefore spirituality and physicality are equally identical. Just like you say, God is not physical, God is also not spiritual. To say God is spiritual is the same Avodah Zarah like saying God is physical. We always say, what is God? He's spiritual. Was epis? Spirituality is also an Avodah Zarah. Sometimes Ruchnis could be a much bigger Avodah Zarah than Gashmis. Because it's much more sophisticated. So Ruchnis and Gashmis are identical. So just like you create Ruchni, you create an Ein of Gashmi. So the Gashmi, the physical, represents that source of Sovev Kalam. And that doesn't go through the regular Ishtalshalos. Yeah. 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 Spiritual DNA, physical DNA comes from spiritual DNA. Like everything. The rhythm of DNA, the structure of DNA, the themes of DNA, the messages of DNA, the idea behind DNA, that's a spiritual concept. It's a spiritual reality. Right. Yeah. But there's also the spiritual codes of souls and of angels and of realities, and every neshama has its DNA. And it replicates cells. We speak about neshamas, zivugim. In Kabbalah, the Rizal always speaks about zivugim, The zivug of a man and a woman creates the merging of the Y chromosomes and the X chromosomes, which can create a child that has both the masculine and the feminine as a result of that zivug. That begins already in Olam Atzilus. There's the zivug of Chachma and Bina, there's the zivug of Moichin and Midas, there's the zivug of what's called Zah and Malchus. These are all zivugim that create completely new realities of spiritual DNA, which create new worlds and new souls and new creatures. And it's all a concept of Ilav. No, the table comes from lumber, but we're talking about the pristine physical world, original physical world, the physical reality. It's not an ulul, the building blocks of Olam Hagashmi. Yeah, once we're in the physical world, one thing evolves from another. That's within the Gashmi. But the leap from Ruchni to Gashmi, right? That's quantum. He calls it a dilug. The jump means, right, there's like a gulf. It's not a gradual transition. Within the physical world itself, you have Ilav Alul, yeah, MS. But the dilug, the leap from Ruchni to Gashmi, is not one. Ruchni will go down, 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 down. For example, a teacher has an idea. The idea is very abstract. You want to bring it down to simple people, you have to give a mashal and another mashal, another mashal, another mashal, right? But from all those metaphors, you're not suddenly going to have a physical reality. You'll have the idea brought down from Atzilus to Bria, Yitzira, Asiya. An emotion, yeah? You can explain the emotion, you can articulate the emotion, you can present it in these words and that words. The emotion that's very, very deep on one level could descend on another level and look like something else. But every emotion has an Ila and has another Ila, another Ila, till the pristine emotion. And it's very different. It could be 1,000 years from one to another. Right? What you experience as a 4-year-old emotionally, suddenly when you're 40 or 50, it's already a different emotion. But it's the same thing. You could see how it developed. When the 4-year-old child, if you want to speak, it's a positive and also in the negative, in the challenging. The 4-year-old child maybe just felt unbelievable fear. Just unbelievable fear. Fear of the world, fear of life, fear of people. When he's 50 years old, he's not walking around saying, I'm scared of everybody. But he is. He is, even more than when he was 4. Because it's already 50 years. But it doesn't look like that anymore because sepasnisht. I'm not walking around. Fakert. Maybe he's the most macho person, I don't know. But it's all fear. It's all fear. That's Ilav Alul, right? You have to be able to trace back and see where it began. But from all of that, you're still dealing with the world of emotions, the world of Ruchnias. So the Alter Rebbe says, the leap from the Ruchni to the Gashmi, it's a new reality, something called Gashmi. All Ruchnius is always points to a source. There's always connection, there's always communication. The physical is the first reality. You look at a world, here I am. So he says, yeah, this is not rooted in Ishtalshalos. This is rooted in Pri-Chachma. This is Ayin. Mamish Ayin. And it's not defined by anything. So he's a Kel Yochid, create a new reality. Part of Ilaval, not part of that structure, you're right. So there's something in the Gashmi that is much more divine, purely divine, than even in the Ruchni. Yeah.
When the Alter Rebbe says that Shanshelis versus Chachma.
Chachma is the first.
The order, like versus Chachma, and then
yeah.
Or does he mean like on a higher?
No, there's an order. Hishtalshlus is always an order.
Versus Chachma?
There's a father and there's a child. The child can't come before the father.
Sometimes we have a machshava, it comes first, and then we learn, then we start thinking, and then so sometimes machshava comes first. Like if we learn Torah, then it's Chachma first. But if you think of something, it's machshava first.
He says here that machshava comes after midas. There's chachma, bina, das, there's midas, and then there's machshava dibur ma'isa. Because machshava is already the formulation of chachma and midas. Chachma and midas come before machshava. Thoughts are not the essential idea. Thoughts are not the essential consciousness. That's what he says here. You thought it comes from India. That's true, huh? Yeah. We live in the world of machshava. That's true, most of us. Right? That's true. That's true. The children of Avram Avinu, he sent to the east. It says in Zoya that he gave them spiritual teachings. Vayitan lehem matanos. No, people think in meditative practice is one of the most important things is to separate the I from machshava, from your thoughts. We become so entangled with thoughts, that's me, right? What I'm thinking, that is me, but it's not. Vaharaya, you could watch yourself thinking. If you can watch yourself thinking, there's an I that's watching the thoughts. So the I is not the thoughts, but the I becomes the thoughts, and we don't even separate. And those thoughts become the ego of the person, and there's no separation anymore. So now my thoughts are very negative or even very positive, but I'm entangled by thoughts, completely entangled. So when he says here that the beginning of Ishtalshel has nothing to do with machshava, to do with chachma, and then from chachma there's midas, and then after midas there's something called machshava. Now our Ishtalshelos work so fast that we right away, boom, machshava. It didn't start with machshava. And even Chachma is the beginning of Ishtalshelos. That's the beginning of the structured soul. The pre-structured soul, we have it's ayin. Chachma me ayin timatze. Chachma is the revelation of ayin. So the bridge from ayin to Chachma is already something that's not ilah v'olol anymore. How does Ein Sof become structure? That's a new chiddush. So already Chachma is already a concept of not ilah v'olol from the source. It's not a devolution from like bina from chachma. Even more so, it's the physical relative to the spiritual. Dilug, a jump, a leap.
Only in our perception, right? Because really is also
Yeah, but what we say in our perception, that perception is very meaningful, because what it really means is that the physical, like, don't take it for granted. You know, often in spiritual disciplines, it's like the Gashmi is nothing, it's worthless. It's really ayin. Yeah. But Alter Rebbe says the fact that we see the Gashmi, that's significant. That's real. It's not a mistake. Yeah. In Avodas Hashem also, there were those who said the Gashmi is it's the source of all evil. And even in the science and physics, the Gashmi, it's not Teifas Makim, it's just an optical illusion. Wake up from your dream. But Lepel, we live in that world. So there becomes a tension between two different worlds. Right? The world of Emes and the world of Sheker. So here he's saying something. He's saying this world of Sheker, so to speak, this world of Gashmi is a reflection of Soviv Kalam. So it has in it something that even the spiritual doesn't have. Because the spirituality of everything is Ilav Olul.
really it's not even a dilug. It is.
Yeah, dilug in the sense that it comes across as something completely separate. It's not looking to connect to the Ilah. It doesn't even say there's an Ilah. Doesn't reflect that. Bis Teufels was ich sag. One of the biggest struggles in physics is how does what's called quantum reality, how does it translate into a reality that's so fixed? Quantum reality is reality on a much deeper level, which we can't see with our eyes, where paradoxes live together and things are completely not logical. Things don't even have a fixed space. But suddenly it graduates into collapsed models that are very, very fixed, very predictable. What happens? What happens over there? There's something that happens.
Something that is not fixed becomes fixed.
Right. How does it happen? So they blame the person, we observe it, and that's why we collapse it into that model. if your eyes would be a little more sophisticated, you wouldn't force the world to be such a gashmi. We create the gashmi of the world. The nekuda here in this mimer is, that's all true. It's all true. There's deeper and deeper and deeper layers of reality. But the ultimate product, the physical, is not a mistake. It's not an error. That is Sovev Kalalman in action. Not Ishtalshalos. All the higher worlds work with Ishtalshalos. And that's why every child, there's a gravitation to go back to the source. It identifies the source and goes back to the source. But then there's a reality of something that becomes self-contained. It doesn't look like an olul anymore. Not because it doesn't come from somewhere, because it comes from a place that's beyond Ilav olul. And that's what he calls here Sovev Kalalman. It comes from the ayin itself. It's not like Chachma, Bina, Das, where the Bina comes from a previous reality relative to it. I'm sorry, what?
Why this world cannot come from the Malchus? Why it has to go from the Sovev?
The ruchnius of the world comes from a Malach Kalalman. The theme, the content, the substance, the inner soul, the inner energy, Mamala Kalalman.
The energy flow you say comes from.
That's Mamala Kalalman.
But what's the Sovev? Because if you look at all the physical reality, it's all energy. Energy is related to mass. Mass
Right.
is a physical reality.
Right.
It's one-to-one correspondence. We don't. There's nothing else. Frequencies relate to mass. Frequencies relate to energy. It's all one-to-one per se, not even in square.
Right.
One-to-one correspondence.
Yeah. At some point, there's a leap. There's a like a break, a breakage or a severance, where suddenly reality is not divine energy. It's not perceived as divine energy. It assumes a concretized reality, whether you want to call it physical energy, physical mass. But there's something, it's not called an Olam HaRuchni anymore. It's called an Olam HaGashmi. Now, the Olam HaGashmi itself has so many different levels of interpretation. Depends what instrument I'm using. If I'm using my glasses, I'm using my eyes, I'm using microscopic instruments. But that's all within the world of Gashmi. But at some point, there's a break-off. They have a breakaway minion. There's a break-off where divine energy is not part of the equation anymore.
The goof and Neshama?
Huh?
Goof is from
It's like goof. It's suddenly there's something called a goof. Now it's true. You go deeper into the goof, The physicality of the goof is extremely, extremely intricate and extremely, extremely deep. But there's some nekuda where reality is transformed into something that has a concretized physical reality, whether it's more gross reality, physical, or more subtle physical. Call it mass, call it energy, call it matter, call it energy. Einstein said the two are interchangeable. That itself was a chiddush. When you talk of energy in science, it's not energy. There's ruchnius energy, divine energy, and energy in science.
Right, but that actually has a correspondence.
Okay.
We use them in similar vocabulary.
No, we use a similar vocabulary because they have similarities.
That have similar
Right. But even the energy in science is already an inyan of Gashmi.
energy inside.
It's much more subtle. Obviously, it's much more subtle.
But what was from Sovev? What exactly, what part of the reality that came after from Sovev? I'm trying to comprehend. Is it like in order the physical reality was completely something new that was invented and it cannot be even
The physicality of something, not its sophistication, the physicality of it doesn't embody, doesn't project coming from somewhere, having a purpose, leading to something. That's a chiddush in the split between Ruchni and Gashmi. Spiritual energy points to a source, and it continues a story. There's something that happened in reality where there's a new thing. We call it the Gashmi. And what happens here? Complete perceived independence without any connectivity to anything or anybody else.
That's only our perception.
Huh?
That's only our
It's the world we live in, though. Yeah.
But it's not a perception, it's just you're talking about
But it's a perception created by the Creator.
But you're saying the first formation of the particles.
Yeah.
That was something like that's what you're referring to? That was the Chidush?
The first Gashmi particle, so to speak.
Like muons, whatever, quarks and...
Quarks, yeah, or even more subtle,
yeah.
if you can break that down.
Well, let's say not great.
But you want to talk about quarks, those aren't quarks.
I mean, the ones that form the electrons eventually, and protons, neutrons, and elements, and
Yeah.
and atoms, and so on and so forth. So those,
When divine energy suddenly assumed a Gashmiistic body, Tziyur,
yeah,
even a very, very subtle one, so he says that was not anymore Ilav Olol. That's like a new, it's like Yesh Me'ayin. Where? From where? Oh, I don't know.
yeah, we talk don't know.
We taka don't know. We taka don't know. Yeah, we don't know.
We try to find it. But
Yeah.
we can't,
That's where the scientific atheist will say, it's not my responsibility to tell you where, from where. It's not my responsibility. Once you have it, I'll analyze it.
the God particle,
Yeah.
can't pinpoint.
Yeah. The problem is, how can you really analyze something when you're a prisoner to it?
And if we're talking about honor itself,
When you're defined by it, you can't really analyze it. Right? What did he say the other day? If you're in the box, you don't see the label.
if it's honor itself, you can analyze.
We can't
If
analyze
this is,
because
if
we're
this
part
is
of it.
us,
The scientist tells you it's not my responsibility to tell you where from. From where? How? You have this, I'll tell you what it is. But you can't really tell me what it is if you're part of it. Because then your description of what it is defined by the very experience of it without any understanding of what it really is.
You're actually thinking with it.
Exactly.
So you're saying that yes.
I'm going to ask the cup to describe to me what a cup is. Was weiß a cup wegen a cup? It's like asking the cup to tell you what a cup is. Was kann a cup wissen, was a cup is? There was a chassid, his name was Dvorkin, Michal Dvorkin. He used to say, in Yiddish, was machst du? Right? Was machst du? So people don't realize, was machst du means, what are you making? Mach. So he would say, was kann schon a gemachte machen? Was kann schon a gemachte machen? What can somebody who's made already make? Was machst du? It was perspective, you understand? Was kann schon a gemachte machen? Relax. Huh? So when the scientist says, it's not, well, I'm going to tell you where it comes from. Once it's here, I'll analyze it. You can't understand the yesh if you don't know the ayin. Your understanding of the yesh is going to be very, very limited. That's, by the way, why, this is an interesting thing, why a disproportionate amount of Jews have been revolutionaries in the worlds of science, physics, psychology, in terms of new ideas. Why? It's not just because their mothers pressured them to learn a lot. It's because all real change, all real inventions come from a new flow of the ayin into the yesh. You have to be able to go out of the box and see it from a much different perspective without any preconceived notions. Because the Jewish soul is rooted in ayin, so therefore it's more naturally inclined to revolutionize things. To say, whoa, one second, let's redo the whole world. But the soul is rooted in a very deep place that goes beyond the yesh. So the point is, so this is the point, that there is that leap, yeah? Let's call the Big Bang. What happened at that moment? I'm using the Big Bang as a mashal because it's a good mashal. But what happens at that moment? I don't know. Once it happened, let's analyze. Let's analyze the helium. Let's analyze light. Let's analyze how the moon was formed. Fine. Let's analyze the fine-tuning of what had to happen that such an explosion can ultimately emerge into a universe. Yeah? So if you want to talk about this, Maim is telling you what happened at the Big Bang, so to speak, spiritually. I mean, I don't mean, again, I'm not talking about that. Okay, fine. Fine. The emergence of divine reality into space, into time, and into matter, yeah? Boom, suddenly. Suddenly, not just in time, suddenly also in concept. Suddenly, boom, from where? Timotze, he says it's a mitzvah. A mitzvah means it didn't come from anywhere. A mitzvah doesn't mean I worked hard for 10 years and now I got a bonus. That's not a mitzvah. A mitzvah doesn't mean I created a company, I sold it for $20 million. It's not a mitzvah. Baruch Hashem, it's not a mitzvah. Yeah, 20 years you were in your office for 19 hours a day. That's not a mitzvah. A mitzvah is an expression, it's a mitzvah. You're walking in the street, from where? I don't know. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Shloisha dvarim boim behesach hadas. 3 things come with hesach hadas, meaning when you didn't focus. Akrav, a scorpion, mitzvah, or Mashiach. Interesting, the Gemara puts these 3 things together. The scorpion comes when you don't expect him. It's also human scorpions. Pop! Here's a bite. You didn't expect it. A mitzvah. And Mashiach is also Bas Chadas. So the Alter Rebbe explains, what's the Shaykh? Mashiach, Akrav, Hesach Hadas. And he says the idea of Mashiach is that if it's coming from your Das, it's not going to be Geula. It always comes from a place that's pre-Das. Adelo Yad. It's pre-Das. In other words, if it's coming Ila Va'alol, I'm expecting it, I'm preparing for it, it's not redemption. It's only relative to my anticipation, which means it's limited to my ego and expectations. Like a scorpion. A scorpion obviously is a painful and maybe venomous bite. The Gemara says when you're davening Shemona Esrei, if there's a nachash on your akev, lo yafsik, if it's a benign snake. Akrav yafsik. Boom, it's dangerous. Huh?
You're saying something gewaldic because the interesting point that scientists try to prove, since they cannot go beyond Levush, right? They cannot even think beyond. They come up with a theory of multiverse. That this universe actually came from maybe dying of a previous universe.
Yeah.
Because they need to pinpoint Levush because otherwise they cannot think.
Yeah.
So and the truth is there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that there is another universe.
Excellent. The theory in science, when the question, how did it happen? And the fine-tuning is so beyond, statistically, it's simply not shaykh. Just after the Big Bang, the fine-tuning that had to happen, not on a second, on a millisecond of so many different factors in order to create a universe is... you can't even, I'm saying milliseconds, not even the right word. It's unfathomable. That to say there was no consciousness behind it happened by mistake is one of the closest things to absurdity you can say. Like I told somebody once, today to believe an atheist, you have to be an atheist, you have to have a lot of emunah. You have to have a lot of faith to be an atheist. It's not so easy. If you know what's happening, it's not easy. You could, but it's not an easy thing. You have to have a lot of blind faith. So the point is, one of the explanations is multi-universes. That means, that this universe is not the only universe. There's endless parallel universes where everything got screwed up. And this is one of, beyond trillions, one of them, this was, the good mazel one, right? We ended up in the good mazel. Everything to disprove, to say that there's no creator, you'll go to a theory that this universe is one out of endless universes. That makes sense. As long as you don't have to say there's something above. Baruch Hashem. You can be mamali all your taivas. It's very deep. The truth is the world of science and seichel is a world of ila va'olol. You look at a reality, you break it apart, and you say, what caused this? And that's a beautiful world. It's the world of science. It's the world really of seichel. Ila va'olol. And you go back to the Ila, and then you go back to the previous Ila, you go to the previous Ila, you go back to the first Ila, but you're looking for an Ila. The Alter Rebbe says, but reality starts when you stop looking for the Ila. Go to the first Ila. You go. But then there's a whole different leap. From Boirei to Nivra is Ein Sof. Ein Sof is not Ila. Ila means I look at the table and I say, where did it come from? I look at the body and I see something happening and I want to know what is the rhythm that created this result and what creates that rhythm and what creates that rhythm. And then you go back to the brain. And it's amazing stuff, Ila v'Ala. It's amazing deep. But it stays by tap Ila. And when you come to the first Ila, chveis nisht. So now you're not going to say there's something outside of that because my world is Ila v'Ala. I don't see an Ila. So all I could say is I have to explain the system from within the system. So it's a very limited relationship with the system. Imagine you have to explain a computer code without including the idea that there's a programmer. You imagine I have a computer code. It's unbelievably brilliant because the computer code of our universe is more brilliant than any computer code that has ever been written or will ever be written. Just the computer code in one human brain, I should say even the computer code in an ant's brain is more sophisticated than any computer code and any supercomputer that any man or woman has written, right? Now you're looking at this code, it's crazy brilliant, and you have to somehow explain the code from within the code itself, and you're not allowed to include that there was a mind behind it. Well, what are going to be your results?
So replicated gene came by itself.
Yeah, the replicated gene became by itself. And the cell, that its sophistication is beyond mind-staggering, yeah. You can't look at anything outside of the cell. So the Alter Rebbe says, how did this happen? So he explains it happened because that reality where divine energy suddenly is eclipsed and something Gashmi comes out, call it the Big Bang, call it the first particle. That's Sovev Kalam. That's Ayin. It's Ayin in the making. And the Yesh doesn't see the Ayin. The Yesh doesn't say, oh, that's my source. Because if the Yesh would say that's my source, it wouldn't be a Yesh. Why not? Because if the Gashmi would say that's my source, you're not Gashmi anymore. You're already spiritual energy. And the whole purpose of creation is compromised. You understand? Ila v'Alul, the Alul lives by knowing the Ila. What brings an emotion, what makes an emotion so alive is that it knows where it comes from. Again, negative or positive. The moment the Yesh knows about the Ayin, it's Ois Yesh. And by the way, that's why it's called Ayin. It's called nothing. Why is it called nothing? It's called nothing. Why is it nothing? Hashem is nothing? Soyer Kalaman is nothing? The answer is, for the Gashmi, it's nothing. Because the moment for the Gashmi, it's something, it's Ois Gashmi. It's outside of its realm, and if you introduce it into the realm, I can't be me. Ila v'Alul fakert. The more I know the Ila, the more Geshmak Alul I am, the more developed, the more deep, the more aware, the more alive I am. By Gashmi, it's Punkt fakert. The moment you introduce to me my source, Ois Kaplishmacher. You can call the Chevra Kadisha. I don't mean the Chevra Kadisha to bury. The Chevra Kadisha because there's nothing. It's all Ein Sof. If it's all Ein Sof, where's the Gashmi? So it's called Ayin. Ayin means nothingness. Why? Because in the world of the Gashmi, it's like a nothing. It's not part of the equation. It's not part of the science. Break down the Yesh, you're not going to find Ayin. And the scientist will say, it's not my responsibility. Yeah. 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 Think of the ray of the sun as a very good example. If you tell the ray of the sun, you know what, go independent. Here you have a ray, let's shut the Venetian blind, you'll become an independent reality. What's the ray going to tell you? You're going to kill me. If you separate me from my source, you're going to kill me. If you put down the Venetian blind and you don't allow me to be connected to my source, I'm done. Because the definition of Eir is a continuum of a source, Moir. That's what light is. Light brings the reality of the source into a new reality. That's what the function of light is. In Gashmi, there's a new Metzias. It's called Keli. The whole purpose of light is connectivity. Light is what allows us to connect. Physically, you could see me. I could see you. And also spiritually, you could see me. I could see you. The whole definition of Oir is connection. That is light. That's why light is so important.
Kli is the expression of machshala.
Kli is a new reality. Kli already takes Oir, right, and defines it as something. Chachma is a keli legabe ayin. And yesh, the physical yesh, that's where it really emerges. Because chachma is also structure, but it's at least still spiritual energy. But the yesh hagashmi, yeah, this is where it doesn't point to anything. And if you use the mechanisms of ilah va'ala, you're going to get stuck. You're going to get stuck. And that's what they always tell the atheistic scientists always tell believers. What are you bringing in other stuff? That's not science. And they're right. It's not science.
From their point of view, they're correct.
They're correct.
And they cannot also.
It's science in the sense that to see such intricate design and to see such incredible randomness without pointing to intelligence is quite absurd. That's science. That's logic, I should say. It's logic. But you want to find in the yesh, you want to find the ayin. Then there's no yesh. The ayin by definition remains nothing. Ilah va'alul, the alul comes to life with the ilah. When a child has parents, the child's life is not compromised. Attachment is the core of life. In the yesh, there's the first concept of not attachment, no attachment.
I think the true science, it's a vulnerable position because they cannot pinpoint it out.
Right.
And the truth is, that's exactly
You're right.
what iron is.
You're right.
They cannot pinpoint the God.
You're right. The moment you could pinpoint God, it's already not the God. You want to put him in a lab and say, let's break down the particle a little further and we'll see God. Then you're reducing God to the particle. The challenge is when the scientist becomes arrogant. When he becomes arrogant, right? And the moment you start asking this question, suddenly he's angry at you. That's already a different reality. That doesn't do with science. That has to do with gaiva and taiva.
Can you be yourself and yet connect to? Can you have your identity?
So you have to understand here what he's saying. So the Alter Rebbe is saying a gewaltige chiddush in the whole of Yiddishkeit. Because in all Svarim you always see the Gashmi as the garbage. It's the source of all the tsaras. Right? Olamazah Gashmi, the Eitzahara, and the Klippus, and the Taivas, and all the problems. In Gan Eden, you don't have these problems. Elamai, it's a place of nisyonis, and this is where you get all the tickets. So you can go into the amusement park, the cosmic amusement park. You can't go on the roller coaster or the Ferris wheel, right, without tickets. So if you want to get to Gan Eden and get on the Ferris wheel and stay there lo'olam va'od, because it gets stuck usually a Ferris wheel. So you need tickets. So where do you get tickets? You got to pay money. So here you get tickets. So that's a conception. And there's a truth to it, obviously. But here in the Maimon is Megala a whole other Nakuda. And that is that the Gashmi itself tells a story that is much deeper even than the Ruchni, because it goes beyond the world of Ilah Va'alal. It goes straight to Sevav Kalalman, straight to the Ayin, which is not defined by spirituality, and therefore it's not defined by physicality, and therefore the spiritual and the physical can be one and can be not one. Like he says, Kachashecha Ka'ira, darkness is light, and therefore the physical is an embodiment actually of pure infinity, of Sevav Kalalman, and that comes out dafka in the Yesh, which doesn't feel that it comes from a source. That lack of connection, that lack of Ilah Va'alul, on one level is a flaw, it's a disadvantage, and on another level has something in the physical that the spiritual doesn't have. Because the spiritual takes you to a higher level of Elikus in the world of Ilah Va'alul. Call it spiritual science, divine energy. And here you go to a place which is beyond energy, it's beyond structure, it's beyond chachma, it's ayin mamish. And yet it doesn't come out in olol. And because of that, the moment the yesh knows about the ayin, it's ois yesh. It can't have attachment, because if it's attached, if it knows about the ayin, it becomes ayin. It's not physical, it's infinity. So for the physical to become physical, the ayin is completely concealed. But that is where the yesh is coming from. So what you see as separate, what you see as ego, what you see as self, is really a reflection of God's pure infinity, which doesn't have to be expressed in ilah v'olol.
But not a full ego, right?
Automatically then you don't have an ego. If you understand this is the biggest war on ego. All the other wars on ego are superficial.
What's the next step?
All the other wars on ego are basically trying to fight the ego. Now the Rebbe says you don't have to fight the ego. If you understand what your ego is, you understand that your ego is Ein Sof. That's where all transformation happens. All other ideas, you're going to fight the ego. You'll be stronger than your ego. There's a lot of beauty in that. Your I is not your ego. Here he's now going to the next step. The next step is when you realize that the truth of the ego is Ein Sof, so then the whole ego doesn't begin. You don't have to fight it. What are you fighting? What are you fighting? It's typhus. So there were, in very many spiritual disciplines, they wanted to take you away from ego, take you away from the physical, take you away from embodiment. Right? The more you can disassociate from the ego of the universe, the more you could be one with yourself. And there's a lot of depth there, a lot of depth. Don't underestimate that. But now he's going a step further. And he's saying that's all in the world of Ishtalshalus. The world of Ishtalshalus, that's important, to be able to go to the Ilah and not get stuck in the Olol. Be able to go to Chachma and not get stuck in Machshava. Be able to go to Midas and not get stuck in Machshava.
So in order to get there, you have to first go through.
Yes. Yeah. But then there's something even deeper. And that's Sovev Kalam, the complete infinity, Kel Yachol. And where's that expressed? Dafka in the embodiment.
Is that the limitation of spirituality?
Yeah, that's the limitation of spirituality.
Because it doesn't have a boundary,
Yeah.
and the physical world doesn't.
Yes.
Is that why we need both of them?
Yes.
Again, the limitation of spirituality.
The spirit doesn't have boundaries. And the physical world is all about boundaries. And the Alter Rebbe is going to say, we're going to learn a few lines, that's the key chilik of Torah and mitzvahs. Torah is ishtalshalus. Torah is chachma emerging on many different levels. You have pnimiyus Torah, you have nigla of Torah, but it's all ishtalshalus. It says in Zohar, Oraisa mechachma nafkas. Torah comes from chachma. The world of mitzvahs is a very strange world. Suddenly you're taking leather from animals and wrapping it, we take it for granted, right? You told me, a Vishnitzer Chassid told me that, whatever it's, he told this to me, he said that Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzes in Vishnitzer in Muncie, somebody put honey on top of the mechitza. Because he didn't want the women to, by hakafas, they like to see. So they were climbing up and, were just putting their head over the mechitza. So he put honey over it, right? So that the women would stay away. So we have interesting people. Creative people, yeah. Without ilah v'olol, yeah. Like somebody once said, yeah. Huh? Okay, whatever. Fine. At least honey better than bleach. So zayn a bissel zis. Zayn a bissel zis. Anyway, so the Gabbai or the Ruv, I don't know exactly, got very upset, got on their dresses, and it's just not nice. You could tell people, you can talk to people menschlich. The Rebbetzin okay. So they asked, there was an African American there who was, took care of the shul, cleaned it and this. They asked him if he saw somebody coming to put on. He said, yeah. They said, why didn't you stop him? Why didn't you stop him? He said, I'll tell you the truth. I'm looking at you guys, yeah? A few days ago, you take chickens and you start putting it over your head, yeah? Then you're banging willows on the floor. Then you're shaking citruses and you're closing your eyes and you're waving it. How am I supposed to know that putting honey on top of a wall is not part of this culture? How, yeah? Explain to me why that's so much worse than your kapara zechalifos zet murasi, yeah? Ganz good, yeah? And then once I saw Junior with Sukkos, Sukkos is the ganz meshiga, with the minyanim and my gate, my life, yeah, nobody knows, it's a ganz lebedik. So I asked him, how do you look at all of this? Running with that shyness, with this, if you grew up with it, it's part of your culture. I said, do you see it strange? Strange? He says, Rabbi, this is spiritual tradition. It's a spiritual tradition. My point is, the world of mitzvahs, we take it for granted, but the world of mitzvahs is a very strange thing. In the Eastern disciplines, where they have traditions from Avram Avinu, it comes before Matan Torah. There's no concept of physical mitzvahs. Fakert. Meditation, spirituality, that's the name of the game. Segregation from the ego. Segregation from achshava. Segregation from the world of particularities. In Judaism, most rituals, most mitzvahs revolve either eating and drinking a little too much, family life, relationships, intimacy, how to go to the bathroom, how to sleep, how to cut your nails, how to get dressed. In many ways, that chased away so many Jews because this is all God wants. If you tie your shoelaces this way, you're going to burn in purgatory. And if you cut your nails in the wrong order, you know what happens to you, right?
How did Avram separate spirituality?
Because before Matan Torah, he was right. Before Matan Torah, that's the whole nekuda of the mind. Before Matan Torah, he was right. Before Matan Torah, there was a gulf between the spiritual and the physical. They couldn't, it says in Medrash, so the experience of divinity happened through meditation.
Connecting body and the spirit also, yoga, it's all
Yeah.
come from there.
Yeah.
Unification.
The unification.
Of body and spirit.
So these Jews that were attracted to Eastern practices, they were attracted to the spirituality without the Torah.
Yeah. Spirituality pre-Matan Torah of Avram Avinu is reflected in many of the Eastern disciplines. It says in Zohar, it says Avram sent his children to the East and he gave them gifts. What gifts did he give them? Tennis bracelets? Maybe two. He gave them a credit card that they could sweep whenever they want to go out for a drink. Could be two. Avram Avinu had credit cards. He had a good credit. The real gifts he gave them, Rashi says, Shem Tumah Mosar Lahem. Even Rashi says, there was some name of Tumah. It says in Zohar, Abba says, there was spiritual disciplines. One of the most important mantras in Buddhism is Brahman, which they attribute to Avram. It's one of the most important personalities and teachings. My point is that a lot of these disciplines reflect a vision of the world that's based on spiritual energy, which is very powerful.
What's our avodah?
Our
Our avodah.
So that's essential. So the whole idea of Torah essentially is divine wisdom, the way it comes down. Even the physical Torah is essentially Chachma. And that's the idea of Kabbalah, Pnimi Yisat Torah. It shows the Chachma in every halacha. Mitzvahs is already a whole new reality. Mitzvahs you can do through meditation. I have to eat matzah. And eating matzah, as spiritual as you are, right? Matzah is matzah, it's carbs. I hate to spoil it. And it doesn't have to be carbs. Quinoa, you do quinoa matzah. And it doesn't feel spiritual eating matzah. In fact, we're busy with a clock. You have to eat it 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. I know a guy who almost had a heart attack because he went over it becomes hard. And then there's the murder, and there's the koirich. And it can become even tefillin, tzitzis. What's tzitzis? You take the wool of a sheep. A lulav, an esther, trumas, meister, stuck. Stuck you have to give with money. Huh? No. So that's the chiddush. He says that the whole world of mitzvahs, that's dafke the gashmi. Only the gashmi, not the ruchni. Not the ruchni. That's the save of kalalman comes out in the mitzvahs. That's the whole world of mitzvahs. So that's why the two pillars, you have Torah and you have mitzvahs. The Torah represents wisdom, chachma, and mitzvahs represents dealing with the gashmi, with the yesh. And you can't have a mitzvah without that. To put it very simple, if you see the whole world as divine energy, you cannot even do one mitzvah. So it's like a contradiction. How are you going to eat matzah? Where's the matzah? What's matzah? It's divine energy. It's atoms at best. Huh?
How is learning Torah connected to Kulam? So we go to the learning without
Right. Right. Was geht gesagt? Yeah. The moment I see everything as Dvar Hashem, how can I wrap it on my arm? How can I use the money to give it to a poor person? Avada. The whole world of mitzvah is predicated on the yesh. So till this maimer, you understand, yeah, it's predicated on the yesh, because that's part of the nisyonis of Olam Hazeh. The Rebbe says, no, because the mitzvah is save of kalal, man. Without a yesh, there's no mitzvah. In the world of Ilav Allah, there's no mitzvah. It's divine energy. It's all Ein Sof. So what happens in Ein Sof? It's the cessation of yesh. And for there to be a yesh, you can't know about the ayin. Again, the moment ayin comes into the world of yesh, ois yesh. Ilav Allah, when the ilah comes into the Allah, it's not ois Allah. A student who's sitting at the feet of his teacher, and the teacher goes away, when the teacher comes back, the student is more excited. He doesn't disappear. Because the student is a continuum of the teacher. Bina is not afraid of Chachma. Bina wants Chachma. Dibur is not afraid of Machshava. My words are not afraid of my thoughts. My words need my thoughts. The more thoughts, the better the words. Right? The more you plan, the better the words. Because Dibur comes from Machshava. It's Ilav Allah.
The Eastern religions, in a sense, are like the thought without the words.
Yeah. Yeah. So the world of Gashmi, the world of particularity, the world in which there is a sense of detachment, in which you can't find the Ilah. Because again, if the Ayin came into the Gashmi, it's Ois Ayin. It's Ois Yesh, I mean. It's the opposite of Ilah v'Allah. What was that? That's an akud of Ein Sof Mamish. He says that's from Sof of Kalam and Kei Yachal, where Hashem is not defined by anything. So suddenly you have a new reality. It points to no source, and it's really divine. It comes from the divine. It's an embodiment of the divine. But how is it an embodiment of the divine? Not in a way of Ilah v'Allah. Doesn't point to anything. It's not rooted in spiritual divine energy. That's the power of the mitzvah. You'll say, I could sit every morning and meditate for 3 hours. Right? There's people who put on tefillin for 2 minutes. With not much awareness, let's be frank. Boom, 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 boom. So a person meditates for 3 hours. You'll say he did mitzvahs tefillin, he didn't do mitzvahs tefillin. Person is sitting by the Seder. Instead of eating matzah and mother, yeah, and koirich and an egg, why don't we sit and meditate about emancipation? Wouldn't that be better? Maybe less boring than a lot of Seders. Sit for 3 hours and meditate. And you know what? It's not a bad idea. I don't know when to do it. Probably first finish the Seder with your kids, and then at 1 a.m, go meditate till 4. But the mitzvah is I have to eat the matzah. So most Jews thought it's a weird religion. It's a weird, like, where's the spirituality? And the truth is, rituals can destroy spirituality. For many Jews, that became the whole Judaism, rituals, and they ran away from it. 30% of Buddhists in America are Jewish, even though we're only 2% of Americans. And 70% of New Age leaders of groups in America are Jewish. 70%. What's a reason for it? Buju. Jubu. What's the reason? There's a reason for it. They're infatuated by it. Because the truth is, the mitzvah, it's very misunderstood. It's very misunderstood.
Mitzvah is or in a kli?
The mitzvah is dafka in a kli. If you have oir, there's no mitzvah. I told you, if the world is divine energy, how many mitzvahs can you do?
So we really connect to the or, right? Not the kli.
Oh. So there's the guf of the mitzvah and there's the neshama of the mitzvah. The Torah of the mitzvah, the Torah, the theme, the kavanah, that's ilah v'alo, that's chachma. The yesh of the mitzvah, which has no meaning. Oh, that's ayin. Of course it has no meaning. That's what yesh is. There's a power in the mitzvah in the fact that it has no meaning, in the best way, in the best sense of the word. It has no meaning because it comes from a place that's deeper than meaning. Meaning is ilah v'alo. There's a part of the mitzvah like vas, vu, ven. What do you want? Again, we take it for granted because many of us grew up with it. I mean, you don't take it for granted because you didn't. Many of us grew up with it, so it's like, yeah, kaparis and honey on mechitzas too. Why not? I mean,
Can't you eat matzahs and meditate at the same time?
yes, you should eat matzah and meditate. My point is, once I'm meditating, what does the matzah add? Let's be real.
You meditate on the matzah.
Oh, the truth is, the matzah is more important than the meditation. Why? The matzah brings the meditation to Ein Sof. You understand? Yeah. The awareness to a deeper place. Yeah. It's not a contradiction. I'm bringing it out as a contradiction just to bring out the 2 points. The bittul of the mitzvah is much deeper than what the meditation will take you. Now, it's hard for us to hear. It's hard for us to hear because meditation is very rich and it's enlightened. It brings you. Sometimes you have mitzvahs without any awareness, without meditation, and the person could remain very, very grub, very brute. It doesn't, like it says, mitzvahs b'loy kavanah keguf b'loy neshama. There's a deadness. You're like a zombie, a robot. Right? That's why it's so important to understand the pnimius. You have to understand Torah. You have to understand and Matan Torah, the pnimius of it. But there's something in the very meaningless physicality that has the secret of life. It has a secret of Ein Sof. And it's also true in relationships with people. Sometimes those who are amazing meditators, they can't stay in a marriage, for example. They can't stay in relationships. It's too petty. Some great spiritual masters said that the worst thing to do is to go into such a relationship because it takes you away constantly from the world of oneness. Yeah, it's structure and it's listening to somebody else, and people are very limited, and we all have our pettiness. Right? That's like the ultimate world of yesh. But in Yiddishkeit it's not that way. Verkehrt. The Dire B'Tachtonim is in that world. Because there's something, the Baal Shem Tov once said, a soul comes down for 70, 80 years to do a favor to a person, physically or spiritually. What is he saying? A neshama comes down to do a favor to a person physically or spiritually. A neshama kommt herab 70, 80 Jahre zu tun ein Teufe zu a zweiten begashmis und befragt beruchnis. What does that mean? Come on. This is my ganze yichus to do a favor to another person, and noch one favor, and everything else is a hachana for that moment, and then that moment I miss because I was in the higher worlds. What's the Baal Shem Tov really saying? That favor can only be in a world of yesh. In a world of complete divine energy, you don't need my favors. That's just fine tovus. Certainly not begashmis. But it's in that world, in that very limited world, where there is pettiness, where there is smallness. That's where the deepest truth comes out. Not because it's sophisticated, because it's the truth of Ein Sof. That's the Gashmi. With children you see it, right? Spiritual people get annoyed often. Not only spiritual, all people, they get annoyed with raising children. It's hard. Why? Because what does a child need? Katnus. A child needs yesh, not ayin. A child needs yesh. A child needs your time and your attention, and get down on the floor and play a game and read a book and give a bath and connect and look into the eyes and feed and go buy some ice cream and spend time with each other. And it takes you away from the top of the mountain, whatever that mountain looks like. I'm not talking here about people who are self-centered and gluttonous and they're not interested in relationships. I'm talking about now from the perspective of ruchnius. Right? I'm bigger, I'm more interesting, I'm more sophisticated, I'm more holy, I'm more ascetic. And it does take you away from there. And now you have to pay tuition. Right? After all the tzaddis. And as somebody who sits in the shiur told me once that in his school, when he puts his child there the first day, he goes to the principal and he says, I'm going to ask you something. You don't have to teach my child anything this year. The only thing I ask you is don't ruin him. Don't tell him a thing. Don't destroy his confidence. At least he should come out the way he went in. Don't destroy him. That's it I'm asking you. I'm asking you to teach him anything. Well, it's a little sad humor, but the point is, it's not so easy with all the systems and everything. Right? So some people say, what do you need it for? The first mitzvah in Torah is pru'urvu. The first mitzvah is to have a child. It's the hardest mitzvah. You have to take care of them. So the Alter Rebbe once said, the way he said it, he says, the erste mitzvah in Torah is pru'urvu. Ayid daf machen noch ayid. That's the first mitzvah. A Jew needs to replicate the cell. A yidaf, that's the first mitzvah. It's not just true who have children, obviously. It says the concept, a yidaf machen noch ayid. Make somebody else. To make somebody else, that's obviously going away from my own orbit. So the world of relationships is a world, right? Relationships with family, it's a world where it's a world it gets very intricate. And it's very demanding. And it pulls you down, it pulls you out of your own transcendent orbit into relationships that are very, very limiting. This is what your spouse needs, this is what your child needs. So you can understand that some people feel allergic to it. It's much higher, that's what he's saying. The occupation with the Yesh HaGashmi, the connection with it, that's what mitzvahs represents. That's where you touch something that's much deeper than ilav. That's the power of behavior, that's the power of a mitzvah. For example, in marriages, right, in marriage therapy, or just one example, you'll have couples, they have a lot of challenges. You could sit and analyze the challenges, you can help the husband see the perspective of the wife sees it, and it's all very important. But sometimes you'll tell the couple, here is a list of behavioral changes you should make. 10 times a day, say this to your wife. 10 times a day, say this to your husband. And both will say, but it's not true. It's not true, I'm not feeling it. Let's first change the feelings, and then the marriage will be good. It's a terrible mistake. Because you see, behaviors itself, even though it's chitzonius, it's external, can change dynamics sometimes more than 10 years of inner emotional work. Why? It's the same inyan. Because behavior real deals with the physical. And the physical is rooted in the Ein Sof. So it bypasses it bypasses your mental blockages and goes to a place of innocence inside of you where you're connected. You understand what I'm saying? This is not negating chas v'shalom emotional work and understanding each other. It's very, very important, because if not, the behaviors are going to explode in your face. At some point, boom, I'm done. But sometimes what happens through behaviors is much, much deeper than what will happen through me sitting with you and explaining to you the way your ashkaf is distorted, which may be 1,000% right and it's good, but the behaviors will make the deepest change. It's like the behavior is like changing the code, in the DNA in the computer, and suddenly everything changes. Right? Somebody once in the studies they teach that in a good marriage, so you need to have the baseline positivity. In other words, when your husband does something or when your wife does something, and it could be interpreted as positive or negative, where does your mind go? Do you say, my wife was thinking about me and she loves me? Or do you right away go to, doesn't care about me, selfish, I'm lonely? Where do you go to? When there's something, there's always those things you can interpret, kach, yeah? Where does your mind go to? What is that based on? That's not based on what she said. That's based on who you are. Right? It's based on your mindset, and it's based on 1,000 factors. It's usually based on how much healthy attachment you had as a child. Because confirmation bias, either it becomes a confirmation that you're lonely, or it's a confirmation that somebody loves you. So what's your baseline? Is your baseline that somebody loves me, or is the baseline that I'm a worthless, wretched creature? And anyone who ever says they like me has to prove it over 20 years. And even then I won't believe them, because I can't believe myself that I'm worth anything. Was that clear? Okay, good. How do you begin to change such a thing? So the answer is, there's a lot of work a person has to do. Now, if there's real trauma with a capital T, you have to sometimes do very powerful and intense work in order to be able to help make that shift. But there's one very powerful thing that's a tzad hashava, and that is behavior. Right? The big marriage gurus will always tell you that the energy, a positive vibe in the house happens when the ratio between positive comments and critical comments is 20-1 throughout the day. That means for every one negative comment, negative doesn't mean bista fed, bista behema, drop dead. Negative means your tie is dirty and it doesn't match. It's not geschmack, right? Or why you late? Why you late? We had to go, right? Or you forgot the wine. And negative doesn't mean necessarily very negative. Positive could mean anything like, wow, you're so handsome, to thank you for working so hard to support our family. I love your sense of humor. You're so kind. Whatever it is, you look beautiful. Genuine. 20-1. In other words, every 24 hours, one negative, gesundheit, bist ein Mensch, but 20 positive. Then what happens is the baseline in the house is, it's going to be positive. Now, 20-1 is a big one.
As long as you don't keep count.
Very good. Very good. Very good. So l'chayr, it's a stid, it's a joke. And by the way, 20-1 is mahadrin min mahadrin. The base is 5-1. So machlokes actually by therapists, if it's 4-1 or 5-1. By the way, it's a machlokes. You think only Basil and Beshamay had machlokes and they have machlokes? It's minimum 4-1 or 5-1. Huh? But yesh lahachmer. The Mishnah Berurah says yesh lahachmer. But 5-1 is minimum. What's past 5-1? For every one negative comment, it has to be a ratio of 5-1. Then what happens? What happens then is, when you say something, she says something, your neural pathways, where do they go to? They go to, wow, she loves me. So instead of running away, you get closer. It's critical. Now somebody's going to say, this is a joke. The whole reason I'm doing 5-1 is what? To be able to have a positive perspective. If it would be positive, I wouldn't have to do 5-1. So this is all good for yeshiva bachrim, these questions. Right? Ilu v'olu. It's very good questions. Or as Reb Nuchem said, if you're busy counting, what type of relationship is it going to be? I already did 5 compliments. So here's the funny thing, and it sounds funny. Try it, and you'll see that it works. It works. As a result of this, you stop counting. So you say, why does it work? It's mamash shaloi l'shma. The answer is because behavior is rooted in a deeper place of self than self-conceptualization. You understood? The Gashmi, physical behavior, is rooted in a deeper place. And therefore it makes a dent in a place that bypasses a lot of your psychological blockages. That's the koyach of behavior. It looks like it's chitzonius, but it's like the yesh. It's like the yesh agashmi. It looks like it's chitzonius, but really it's more pnimius than pnimius. And that's why it doesn't look like pnimius. Ruchnius is all about pnimius, authenticity, expression. Gashmi, it is what it is. It is what it is. Because it's more pnimi than pnimi. You understand? It doesn't have to be pnimi, it could be chitzon. Ein sof, God doesn't have to look pnimiistic. God could look very external. Say, God, don't turn God into such a pnimi. In the yesh, he comes out as a chitzon. It's fine, he's not afraid of chitzonius. He doesn't have to be so spiritual. We're afraid of not being spiritual, some of us. God is not afraid, he doesn't have to be spiritual. He can be petty and physical and technical, he's fine. In a marriage also, behavior has a secret to it. Now, there are disclaimers. If a person is really, really broken, if a person is completely broken, right? If there's a serious mental disorder, serious mood disorder, mental challenges, trauma of a different magnitude, none of this may work. I'm just saying this because some of you, you may say, thank you for your advice, Rabbi, why? But thank you, no thank you. There are situations where somebody is so broken where simply nothing can work. And then it's a whole different, and then the question is if they're aware of how broken they are. If they're not aware, it becomes dangerous. So I'm just making that disclaimer, you have to be aware of this, right? Somebody was very, very abused. Somebody is suffering from personality disorder, mental illness, these things. The rules are different because it's just, you have to be sensitive to these things. There's no black and white, rules that apply to everything. But we see this is the power of behavior. Why is the power of behavior so deep? It's because the koyach of maisa. The koyach of maisa goes to a much deeper place. That's the power of the guf. That's the power of the guf. That's the power of the gashmi. There's something in the gashmi that is incredibly, incredibly infinite. And you have to respect it. That's why the guf has something that the neshama doesn't even have. The embodiment of the soul, you would think it's just a nuisance, right? The neshama out of the body is much better. It sees everything. There's no ego. There's no mess. And sometimes you need to go out of the body in order to be able to see the body. But the real nikud is that in the gashmi you can reach something that's deeper than everything. That's the wisdom of the guf. And that's why in the end of the day, you don't have to get rid of the ego. You have to realize that the ego is the embodiment of Ein Sof. And then you don't have to get rid of it. This is the Nakuda of Purim. What do you see the connection with Purim?
No, I'm just saying that the Gashmi,
Yeah.
what's the elevated status of Gashmi?
Yeah. That's the Nakuda of Purim. That's why Haman wanted to kill the body of the Jews. More than the soul, he wanted to kill the body. Antiochus wanted to destroy the neshama. He didn't care about the body of the Jew. Haman, he wanted the body. La hashmid, la regula abed. We saw it in our generation, with the Haman of our generation, Hitler, Yamach Shemai. He didn't only want to destroy the soul, the body, the guf. And in a way, more than Haman. Haman wanted to kill them. Hitler, even after the Jews were gassed, he sent them all into the crematoriums. What did the crematoria do? It didn't kill them, they were dead already. What did it do? It destroyed the dead body. In other words, the Rebbe once said this at a Purim Fabrengen. The Yamach Shemoiniks, evil senses the power of Kedusha and it's threatened by it. The Yamach Shemoiniks were toifas, they felt the Kedusha in the guf of a Yid. Even in a lifeless body. It was too Jewish. That body had to be burnt and reduced to ashes. And now, finally, we got rid of the Jew. He's dead. Yeah, on one level they wanted to hide evidence. With ashes, there's no evidence. They scattered the ashes in the water, they buried the ashes. There's no evidence. But the Mesidus, the commitment they had to get rid of the body, it's a dead body. No. The guf. That was Megala, the Kedushas HaGuf. And Haman wanted to get rid of the body. The guf of the Jewish people. That's why Hanukkah is more of a spiritual holiday. You light candles, you say Hallel. It's about light. And Purim is about Kalim. Purim is all Mishloach Manas, Matanas Lavyonim, Adalayada. It's a very, very... a lot of people don't like Purim. Why? Huh? It's a very physical holiday. You know what I mean? So without the mime, it's taka hard to connect to it. Like, leave me alone, because I'm not a party animal. And I don't like when people throw up around me. You know, Purim became like, by some people, it's like just a hefker holiday. You drink and teenagers smoke everywhere. We were sitting by Purim Fabreng with Rabbi Khan. He was on Mashpia. So somebody was a little tipsy, he was making jokes. So Rabbi looks at him and says, "Die jokes are in good for Tisha B'Av. Purim is a Ernste-Tag." So Yiddu learned Chassidus. He says, these jokes are good for Tisha B'Av. He didn't mean to make jokes on Tisha B'Av. He meant, Tisha B'Av, people are sad. Fine. Soon Tisha B'Av will be a Yom Tif, so you can make jokes. But he said, Purim, it's a serious day. In other words, when you think that the whole idea of Purim is that we can make jokes beheter because we don't have to learn, you miss the whole inyan. In a way, Purim is deeper than any other Yom Tif. Because it's the Gili Hayesh and the Guf. It's the Gili of Ein Sof. Obviously, then the Suda of Purim is different. The Mishloach Manas is different. Matanas Lavyonim is different. Mishloach Manas, you give a person a gift of food and you smile to them. And you say, here, this is from me to you. Yeah? What is that? It's not a spiritual experience, but it's deeper than a spiritual experience. Matanas Lavyonim, the same thing. Sudas Purim, the same thing.
Humor is the best way to
express. Yeah, but this wasn't humor. It was cynicism. You're right. Humor, yeah. Humor is good. Humor is very good. The Gemara says that Rabbi, before every shir, he would start off with a milsat b'dichasa. Gemara says in Psachim that Rabbi would begin with a joke and everybody would laugh, or Batchi Rabbanan, they all laughed. And then there was awe, Yosef b'shmaitza, and he would start a shir. Huh? I don't know if he started with a milsat b'dichasa, but I am the milsat b'dichasa. I don't have to start off with the Milsa B'dichasa. Sometimes if you're the Milsa B'dichasa, Shengut. You understand? You don't have to create jokes. You become the... The truth is, a very deep madrega to be a Milsa B'dichasa. It means you don't take your ego seriously. Hopefully one day I'll be able to become a Milsa B'dichasa. What does humor do? It disarms people. Why does it disarm people? Because they don't feel agendas and there's no competition in humor. You know what I mean? It's not like I'm proving something to you. Humor is a very disarming tool because everybody relaxes. There's no like you and me. Humor creates equality. We can laugh about the same things. It's like the other said, when somebody tells a very moving story and he cries. Also, it disarms people because it touches people on a level of equality.
There is no machloikus.
There's no machloikus in humor. It's like, oh, it's not a good joke. Okay. I'm not going to take you to court. Huh? That was funny. It's not a good joke. It's not a good joke. Or according to Beis Hillel, yeah, it wouldn't be a joke. Okay, no problem. You know what I mean? If Anudnik, yeah, Anudnik. But the point is, how do we get into this? Oh, humor. Yeah, no, he was sitting by the Suda and it was like Purim. He was like in Hebrew it's called Hishtalel. You know what Hishtalel is? It's a gemacht meshiga. Yeah. Adaloyada doesn't mean drunk. Adaloyada means a place where I can go out of das, where my reality doesn't have to be defined by das. It's the most antithetical thing to being drunk, by the way. We call it drunk because when we hear the word adaloyada, yeah, the way we toifas adaloyada means you're drunk. Adl Yad is the exact opposite. Adl Yad is the deepest avodah. It's much deeper than being sober. It's much deeper. It's much harder being Adl Yad than being sober. Adl Yad means I don't define reality based on das. I don't have to grasp things. It's not Ilah v'Olel anymore. Huh?
Go straight to Kesser.
Kesser, yeah. Super conscious. It goes to the ayin itself. It's very scary, Adl Yad. Because Adl Yad means you lose yourself. But that's the Nekuda. So that's why Haman, he wanted to destroy the guf. So you saw in our generation, the obsession with the guf of the Jewish people, because they were toifus the Kedushas HaGuf, not just Kedushas HaNeshama. And that's extremely important, and that's why, after the Holocaust, the way I understand it, there's such an emphasis on Kedushas HaGuf of the Jewish people. Today, one of the worst things you could tell children or bachrim is, don't take care of your body. Your body is evil. Just take care of your mind, take care of your neshama. It's a betrayal. Because during the Holocaust, what got revealed in the world was how holy the Jewish body is. The obsession of Hitler, Yamach Shemai, with the body was because of he felt the elokus in the guf, not in the neshama. And there were Jews who were completely secular, atheistic. They couldn't care less about Judaism. They were murdered with the same venom like the holiest Jews in the world. Why? Because there was a holiness that he felt that came out of the physicality of the Jewish presence. And that's a whole different inyan. So today, what type of sensitivity do we have to Jews to be able to see the holiness in the body? If the Yamach Shemayni could see it, so I won't be able to see it. You have to learn from your enemies. If he saw the Kedushas HaGuf in every Jew, not because the Neshama, because the Guf. So it teaches you how to look at somebody. And by the way, that's one of the deeper reasons why in this generation is revealed more and more the wisdom of the body. The somatic wisdom, Milas HaGuf. It's working with the Guf. The Baal Shem Tov already said that Yiddishkeit has to work with the Guf. Azev Tazev Ima. But in this horrible calamity the Jewish people experienced, it became an explosion of the holiness. 6 million bodies were burnt because they were Jewish. How much of the Kedushas HaGuf came into the world? So that's why today, Avodas Hashem must integrate soul and body. If it cuts off the body from the soul, it's not the emes. And Alter Rebbe says when Mashiach comes, the soul is going to get nurtured from the body. In other words, there's going to be revealed the mila of the guf over the neshama, and the neshama is going to get its inspiration and its divine flow from the guf. Really? With guf, this guf. That's why Tchias HaMesim is an important idea in Judaism, the resurrection of the dead. Why? You're dead. The soul lives in Gan Eden. The answer is no, the body that you worked with for 70, 80, 90, 120 years, that body, it was not a waste of time. The nervous system that you're calming, the nervous system that you're regulating, the cells in your body that we work with our body, it's a vehicle. So you think, okay, it's a vehicle. When you're dead, you're dead. Tchias HaMesim is a yisoid in Yiddishkeit. Why? It's a beautiful miracle, fine. Why is it a fundamental idea in Judaism? It's a fundamental idea in Judaism because it's all based on this nekuda. It's based on the nekuda. The work in the guf is eternal. It's eternal. It's not just the work with the soul is eternal. The work with your body is eternal. You hear what I'm saying? The work with the guf is eternal. Huh? You have to respect it. Mipsari echzelika. Mipsari echzelika. From my flesh I will perceive God. That's why Tchias HaMesim is such an important yesod. There's a word in halacha. Shinui hachayzer libriyasei einay shinui. A change that's going to go back to the way it was before the change is not called a real shinui in halacha. For example, if somebody steals, right, something from somebody else, and changes it, there's two types of change. A change, you take a beam, for example, and you put it on your sukkah, right? So it's now in my sukkah. But it's not hard. I could bring it back. I take off the beam and give it back to him. Sometimes you make a change in something, and you take silver and you mint it into a coin. You could melt down the coin and go back to silver. But sometimes you make a change in something and it's irreversible. right? What are you going to do with it? Take a dough and separate the flour from the water after it's a dough. Good luck. How are you going to do that? So the halach is a shinui hachayzel b'riyasa lo yishmei shinui. It's not a real shinui. Because death is only a temporary situation, it came from the Eitz Hadas. And with Chiyas HaMeisim, it's going to be reversed. So even during death, it's not called that the body is really dead. It's not. It's a transition. It's a journey. And it says one of the reasons why we don't cremate, because cremation is like a destruction of something. That's what Hitler wanted. When you bury something, you're planting it. When you plant something, you're not destroying it. Any goof that goes into the earth, afar atam alafar tashav, the body becomes part of the earth. And it creates new growth, new produce. So everything becomes part of a new generation of vegetation. We don't realize that. When something goes into the earth, even all the animal, all the fossils and everything, it creates life. So the goof it's not the end, it's the beginning, it's planted. The ultimate growth will be Tchiyas HaMeisim. But Tchiyas HaMeisim is a continuation to burial. So when a goof is buried, if I can't mention gedacht, lo yaleinu, what happens is, bila hamavis, it gets swallowed into the earth, and then there's a new, zayrim bedima berini yiktzayiru, it's the beginning of growth. So when this Maimed Alter Rebbe was Megala, started to be Megala, the Mailas Hayesh, which is the Guf, the Gashmi, and Olam Haza, the physical world, which is expressed in mitzvahs, which most mitzvahs can only be done in those properties, with the body in the physical world. And if everything was energy, spiritual energy, what am I going to put tefillin on? I once heard from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he said he heard from his shver, his father-in-law, that he heard from his father, the Rebbe Rashab, that he rolled up his sleeve. His son's name was Yosef Yitzchak, the Rebbe Rayat. So he said, Zeh, giba kuk, vitayer der guf is, as zu libdem od der Eberster arois gegossen, as oifel teiro mitzvahs. Look how precious the body is, that for this Hashem poured out. It's Oizgigossen. He poured out his soul. All of Torah mitzvahs. Zeh. So he said, why did he have to uncover? He could have said it. He said, Legalo is Gashmi is Hayat. He could have said it, but then it wouldn't be the Vart. It's not. He rolled up his sleeve to be Megala the Gashmi, and he said, Zed Vitayer. He didn't want it to be an intellectual idea, it to be a visceral idea, a visceral experience, to reveal the Gashmius of the hand. Say, Zeh Vitayer Aguf is. But this is the guf in its true pristine beauty. We could take our bodies and we can abuse our bodies. We all know that, right? Some of us are good at it. And the reason we can abuse our bodies is because it's not in the world of ilah va'alal. It's the world of detachment. It's the world of the yesh. But when you're megala, the true yesh of the guf, then you don't have to dismiss the body. Then the guf itself is the greatest gili of the Ein Sof, just like the physical world. And that's where you don't have to run away from the ego of the yesh. On the contrary, you just have to see what it is, that it's deeper than ilah va'alal. It doesn't point to the source, not because it has no source, because the source is a much, much deeper source. It's Sof of Kalamas, it doesn't point to it. Okay. Huh? There's a shir Monday morning. Tainus Esther will have a shir, and that's going to be 7:45. And Purim in the evening, there's going to be a fabrengen here. Everybody is invited. 8 o'clock after your Suda right here in Shul, with music and food. That's Tuesday evening. Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach. Shabbos is a regular schedule, and everybody have a beautiful day and a beautiful Shabbos. Try to erase Hamalek. Yeah.